The difference between an idea and an ideal is manifold. An idea is one that elaborates on the possibilities, that playfully examines even things that might not be possible. Such as I like to think of the fact that when God in the Holy Trinity discussed what kind of a creation they would make and when they would make it, because before they made it, it wasn't there. So there is a before and after to God as well. And in parenthesis, the whole notion of God outside of time is one that Jewish thought and Scripture does not substantiate. It's a Greek idea. God is very much outside of physical time, but he's not outside of the give and take of a love relationship, as Jesus expresses it when he says, the love wherewith you, God, have loved me, the Son, should also be among the disciples in John 17. There's a love relationship, a give and take, and a mutual enjoyment of each other, not from ignorance met with knowledge, but rather from experience to experience that's treasured in the Holy Trinity. And they create a real world in which all kinds of things are possible, in which things can be imagined. I, for one, imagined that they discussed whether they should make a unicorn, as well as all the other goody animals they made, and then turned it down. So I'm having one on my tie instead. And then they created a specific universe. But a unicorn would have been possible as well, you know, and so forth. And this is what having ideas is about. You know, are mountains painted pink or are they gray? Well, it depends on what you want to say and what you want to see and all kinds of things. When I was a boy, I thought about an automobile that would run on water. We're almost there, but not quite yet. I thought it would be much cheaper than petrol. Of course, it would be, except the whole mechanics of it is much more complicated than people thought. Nevertheless, you know, you think and you have these ideas of what you might do, how to prepare supper for when your spouse comes home, imagine what your child feels like when they come home tired from school, and what would you do to remove that tiredness or not to have it weigh in so heavily that you can't even talk and the child is just hopelessly cranky, and so forth. You imagine things that are possible within reach, good ideas to improve a situation. It's very different from having an ideal in your mind that is unachievable. And for Adam and Eve to pretend that they could be like God, to fall for that, was such a dumb thing to do, and yet is so appealing. Because wouldn't it be neat to be like God? Except, of course, we've just been made. So how could we be like God? The reality of an ideal is that it cannot be realized without doing violence to something that is real. And we'll see that as we go through the 4 weeks. Political ideals, marriage ideals, church ideals, all kinds of ideals that have been set up as, wouldn't it be better if? Wouldn't it be utopic if only? Visions of perfection in one's mind, which, however, every time they've been imposed on the movement, the historic reality of human beings in a fallen world, have only been able to be implemented in a measure for a moment with tremendous human suffering. My father-in-law told us before we got married, and my wife remembers it from many, many times that he mentioned it, if you're not going to be satisfied with anything but perfection, you will always have nothing. And that's the reality with ideals. If you're going to insist on an ideal being opposed, then it will only be possible in part with tremendous human suffering. To bring it up to date, you know, we admire the freedom-loving explosion, as it were, in the Arab Spring. It's delightful to see fellow human beings grappling with issues that express much more the fact that they are people and not just followers, numbers, or conformists. Yet on the other hand, to assume that out of this would come automatically a better situation without anything else being considered is idealistic. Democracy does not necessarily bring in a good government. I remind you of what I just mentioned before, and that is in my country, democracy brought Hitler to power, and democracy decided the Jew is not fully a person. Democracy in Yugoslavia let Milosevic come to power, by majority vote. Democracy in India, the largest democracy in the world, doesn't necessarily bring in a good government that cares for its people. So the ideal is always a dangerous proposition precisely because it is out of the range of possibilities. It's a dream. It's wishful thinking. In fact, tying it in with what I said about Scripture and the framework that Genesis gives us,